Hi, Sharon. It's so lovely to see you. Thank you so much for making the time to speak with Tearfund today.
Oh, I'm so excited. I love the work that you do, been a great supporter and a cheerleader for many, many years. So it's good.
It's good, and it's great to connect with you again personally as well.
Yeah.
So you've contributed to our Lent series this year, and we would love to share a little bit more about your thinking behind that. But first of all, we'd love to know a little bit more about you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? What are three things that people should know about you?
I'm a very passionate grandma. I love my three grandchildren, so they are the delight of my life. I love walking on the beach and I love being a pastor. I love being a local pastor. I love listening to people's stories and just pastoring. I love that.
Beautiful. They all sound like very beautiful things.
Yeah.
And what is it that comes to your mind when you hear of Lent? Is this something that you've observed? And if so, in what way?
Yeah. So Lent's kind of been a new journey for me over the past, I suppose, the past decade. I didn't come from a tradition that celebrates Lent. So it's been something new that I've kind of been exploring over the last decade. For me, giving up something or sacrificing isn't part of my practice simply because I can go to that space very, very easily, but I can't necessarily go to the space of um, receiving or immersing yourself in the wonder of God's love for you. So for me, that's a kind of a harder space. So during Lent, for me, over the last decade, it's about trying to sit in that space and trying to fathom the enormity of God's love and just how much he actually loves us. And so every year I try to read something new on the topic of Lent. I love looking at artwork around the Lent period. I love listening to podcasts on it. And I always just try to grab just a couple of thoughts that I'd never thought about before or considered, but usually in that space of not necessarily sacrifice, but just trying to understand or fathom a little bit more about God's love for us. So that's Lent for me, a new experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And obviously, coming to it in a different way, you've sought to be really intentional about that. And the purpose of walking more closely with God through that journey is obviously at the heart of that. But you've heard from him as to how you need to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that.
So,
You talk in your reflection about how God has been shaping you to seek to become love, that love isn't just something you do, but something that you are. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the being and the doing?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to do loving things. You can tick off a checklist and kind of go, well, I dropped off that casserole to that person, or I gave money to this situation, or I have the right theology on this topic, so therefore I have truth. So they can all fall into the doing kind of parts of love. But I remember many years ago, God said, I'm going to teach you what it is to actually be love. And that takes you on a totally different journey, because that's an internal journey. That's often a secret journey. Well, that's where it begins anyway. And it's about so that you become love, so that no matter what situation you find yourself in, you can be love. So you can be love to somebody who may have completely different political viewpoints to you and it irritates you, or somebody has a religious viewpoint which is totally opposed to your theological worldview or your understanding of what theology is. But you can still love them in that given moment, in that given space, And so that's a challenge to actually become love, so that then no matter what situation you're in, you can actually reflect who Jesus is. And I just find myself coming up short all the time. And so I constantly need this renovation of the heart. I constantly need attachment to Jesus, so that then I can do the internal work, or we can do the internal work. And so that then we can constantly be going, like I love at the beginning of the day to examine the previous day and kind of go, well, where wasn't I loved? Where could I have been more loving? And why wasn't I loving in that space? And it's been really exciting. It's taken me on so many different journeys where, you just choose to love, and God just brings the most unusual people along. And all of a sudden you find yourself sitting in their story, and then all of a sudden you're having to consider who God is in this story. You're seeing them and their story, sometimes for the first time, and all of a sudden you realize the only thing you have to offer is presence and being, and then that takes you on a different story with them. And yeah, it's just been this amazing a journey of trying to steal glimpses throughout the day at Jesus, and kind of going, okay, I've got this situation. How can I be love? How can I respond in love? Because I can be very good at doing. I am the master at efficiency, lists and organization. I can do the doing, but I'm not necessarily always the being. And that's the part where I want to change. I want to become more like Jesus in that space. But it might take me a lifetime.
Yeah, I think it takes us all a lifetime, maybe more. I love how you describe it as this starting with the secret journey in that really intimate space.
Yeah.
But then changes. It strikes me as well that to be love in any circumstance means being attuned to the Spirit in that situation as well, doesn't it? As you say, it's not just ticking things off a list and the tasks, but tuning in.
And I think it's becoming familiar with the flavor of God. We often get hung up on the knowledge or the theology of God. And I think that you can have all the best theology and knowledge in the world, and you can still not have the flavor of who God actually is, because it's all in the head. So it hasn't gone down into our soul, into our being. And so we don't necessarily always convey the flavor of God. And I think that this is where our secular world is struggling, because, we say we love you, but they don't necessarily sense the flavor of love. And I think that when you spend time in that secret space, and if you allow Holy Spirit to renovate your heart, it has to include not just the head, but the other parts of who we are, our will, our soul, our feelings. I think it has to renovate those things, so that then not only is our theology and knowledge of God correct, but we're representing the flavor of who He is.
Yeah.
And that
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. It does.
Mm.
And so this would change then the way that you pursue justice. I think sometimes the pursuit of justice can become clouded with that sort of self-righteousness, or it can feel divisive, or driven by anger even. If we are being love, if we are seeking to embody love, how does that change the way we pursue justice through advocacy and engaging with decision makers, politicians?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's always comes out of that story. You hear somebody's story. And so the advocacy, it always begins with a story in that, whatever it is that you're advocating for, you're wanting justice. But the only reason I find myself in those spaces is because somebody's come along and told me their story. And usually I have ended up, after hearing this story, just weeping, just being in this place of lament and kind of going, how as a pastor did I miss that? How as a pastor did I miss that story? How did I not understand that? You know, I might have had these nice middle-class white interpretations or understandings on different issues around social justice. And then you listen to somebody's story and then you just, for me anyway, I have realised how many times I have gotten it wrong. And then when you sit and you just bear witness to somebody's story, you just bear witness to their life and you hear it. And then I find the place of lament is often often the first person that has to change is me. It's not a politician. It's not a piece of legislation. It's not a policy. It's just me saying, sorry, I had no idea. I didn't understand. I just didn't know. Repenting before God. So that whole process of lament and metanoia, and out of that comes this sense of a joining of hearts with that person, where I suppose the technical word would be where you form an allyship. You become an ally with them. You ally yourself with their story because you've heard their story. For me, it's just you become a part of their world, a part of their story. And then you can't help but just want to tell their testimony or their story to somebody who can actually make a difference, who can bring about change. And whether that be a politician or a pastor or a small group or a legislator or a policymaker, it's all of a sudden you want to tell their story and you want their story to be heard. And so you're then coming at it from a totally different angle, rather than we've got to change this social justice issue, or, we've got to change this legislation. It's just coming from this place of seeing the image of God in everyone and trying to introduce story to everyone so that then everybody can understand and actually maybe create change from that place of love rather than just from justice. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes. Yes, it really does.
Yeah.
What struck me in what you were saying before is that relationship between the change out there and the change in here. And then how starting with the change in yourself changes the way you see not only circumstances out there, but also the way you approach what that change looks like. And it changes it entirely, doesn't it?
It does change it entirely.
Yeah. Really transformed by love in that space, right?
Yeah. So then the message, I think, has more chance of being heard because it's driven by love rather than brokenness, I think.
Yes, I was thinking about this today as an aside. I'm speaking to a group of young adult activists, advocates this evening, and I was just thinking, we need, in these spaces, need to spend more time looking for ways to connect with people rather than convince people. And that can really change the whole dynamic of the conversation as well.
Yeah. I know that the times when I have been in that rah-rah space or that self-righteous space, it's usually because I haven't done my lament.
Yeah.
I actually haven't cried enough.
Yeah.
And I haven't I haven't owned my own part that I might have contributed in that space. And so then it's come out as anger or self-righteousness. And that's a hard taskmaster. Like zeal and passion on their own, I think that they're very hard tasks. It's a hard taskmaster. Our soul gets burnt. We can't sustain it over the decades. And some problems will take decades to solve. So we have to have that long-term, there has to be a long-term way of handling these kinds of issues in a way where our soul doesn't burn and blow up, or we don't blow up other people in the process.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I found lament's been a really powerful tool.
Mm.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe this relates to one of the other questions as well, you know, even to how we frame the work of advocacy. You know, we talk about fighting injustice or resisting oppression. I mean, yeah, these are terms that we think of, you know, when we speak of things in the spiritual realm and all of that kind of thing. But how do we do these things with love? How can we, open ourselves to being love even when we're fighting?
Yeah, yeah. I think even in the prayer realm, if we want to take that space, for me, one of the things I've been learning is, again, just the power of lament, of just crying with God. Because you see, God just bears witness, doesn't he? He just bears witness to pain. I mean, that's what the crucifixion, for me, when I think about Jesus on the cross, and then I think of those who are standing by watching this great injustice happening, and they just bore witness, like Jesus just bore witness. The Mary and John, they just bore witness. There wasn't anything. I love how Ronald Heiser says that Mary didn't become prostrate. She just stood there and went, well, evil's having its way today. Tomorrow's another day. But in this moment, I'm just going to bear witness to what's actually happening here to my son, and the wrongness of what's happening. And then you see Jesus, and he's just bearing witness to the sinfulness of humanity, the sinfulness of systems and processes and power. And he just bears witness. And I don't think it was an angry witness. I just think it was this broken witness, this witness of, I love these people and I forgive them. And so the heart of the crucifixion, again, just teaches us so much about what it is to bear witness to people's pain, that I don't think that we can meet anger with anger, but that we have to actually try to understand how Jesus and God bore witness, which came from this place of gentle mercy and love and forgiveness and just this gentle space. And so for me, anyway, that's what I'm learning, that there's power in giving yourself the time to be able to heal enough so that then you can respond out of that space. But that takes time, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
takes time and
Again.
basic.
Yeah, that's right. You've been involved with the Micah Women Leaders Network. You and I have had the experience of lobbying together. And that's a movement that's, really about advocating for justice. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with that network and what you've learned about love and justice in that space?
Yeah, I really loved the heart with which they go. So they go wanting to make allies of people who can make decisions, but people who may have totally different worldviews or understanding or experiences to their own, and that they go in like I suppose the request is to go in with that heart of seeking to form a friendship and to have a conversation, not to beat somebody over the head or to be rude or to be arrogant, to be sensitive to the complexity, and that we may have certain amounts of information, but maybe politicians and their advisors have access to information we don't have, and they're making the best decisions that they can with the information that they have. So to be sensitive to that, but to also represent and to challenge some of the paradigms and worldviews and sort of say, would you consider, would you reflect, would you investigate, would you receive more information, would you be willing to stand up for the poorest of the poor? So I've loved that. And I've also loved the unity. I love the way, there are representation from those who are providing services in the World AIDS space, who have expertise and authority in that space and who have worked really hard at coming up with best practice in that space. I love the unity of that. And then I also love the interdenominational unity, that there are just women from every sphere and they all come together to just advocate for a safer world for all. And I think that in itself, even just that slogan, a safer world for all, I think it's something that whether you're a grandma or whether you're a teenager, whether you're a male, whether you're a female, whether you're Australian or Indigenous or from some other country, we can all go at the moment. I think that we could all go, that's something we can all advocate for. We can all buy into that vision and try to create the colour and the flavour of what that vision from the Spirit of God's viewpoint might actually feel and look like. So I love that space. I just think it's one of the most beautiful spaces in the Christian scene at the moment. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. And what's your experience been of, how has that message and invitation been received?
Well, I'm really lucky. I come from a great electorate. We have an amazing woman, Bridget Archer, and she's always just so open and responsive to learning. But I've also found that other politicians in our state, I don't know whether it's that in Tassie, we have access to our politicians. You go anywhere and you'll meet a politician. You go to the football. We're small enough to have that kind of connection and relationship with politicians. And so it's not hard to start a conversation with a politician. And I've always found them really receptive, open to more information. Sometimes there might be a little bit of pushback, but then there'll always be, I'll look into it, and it's a genuine, I'll look into it. So that's been my experience. I know that's not the experience of all the women on the MICA delegation because, Australia is a big country with a lot of politicians. But by and large, I would say that most politicians, whether they agree with your worldview or not, they are genuinely wanting to do the best, not only for Australia, but for the world in which they live. And they pay such a huge price. They really sacrifice so much to be in that place. So to be able to go into that space, encourage them, thank them, listen to their struggle, but then also encourage them to maybe think about the people in our world who are struggling the most. It's just such a privilege. It's a real honour and a real privilege.
Yeah. I think sometimes people are surprised to hear how receptive and open, and as you say, even if they don't agree, that interest to listen and learn and find out more. It's not what we always see. But it's encouraging when we do.
Yeah. And look, most of them are genuinely loving people. They're there because they genuinely want to see Australia be better, the world to be a better space. There's this strong altruism, this strong other focus that they have within them, which is just such a beautiful gift, isn't it? Like if we treasure that and encourage that rather than try to rip them down or pull them apart. I mean, I would hate that job. I would hate it so much. I don't think I could cope with the negativity and the criticism. And I really believe that we're supposed to pray for our leaders. We're supposed to encourage them. I think we're supposed to be independent. I don't know that we're supposed to be very partisan. I think we're supposed to be bipartisan, and we're supposed to call them to something higher. And I think when we stay in that space as Jesus followers of calling them to something higher, I think it just becomes this privilege because we get to invite them to explore what might heaven look like on earth. And I think it's a beautiful space of advocacy.
Yeah, that is. Thank you for explaining that so well. We're coming up to a federal election. And there have been other, shall we say, notable elections in recent months. Sometimes love is not what we feel towards people who hold power. But how might it change the way that we engage with leaders, whether that's through our vote or our lobbying, our prayers, our conversations, when we do it with love?
Yeah. I don't think that any country can be great or do great things if we don't have some form of unity. And I think that regardless of who comes to power, like I said before, I think that we have to pray and we have to encourage, and we genuinely as Christians want to encourage people to sort of think about what might Jesus do if he were here. So I think we just have to keep encouraging our politicians to think bigger than what they are thinking. But I don't think that any politician will ever listen if it comes from this place of rudeness or arrogance or anger or judgment. And I don't think that the Australian people will understand a Jesus vision of the world if we are constantly in that space as well. I'm probably not explaining that very well, but I found myself over the last couple of years spending a lot more time in prayer and being a lot quieter, trying to say less, because I just feel like there's so much noise out there. There's just so much noise. And so I think it's hard at times for Christians to hear from God, let alone for non-Christians to have any kind of sense of a spiritual presence, or what that spiritual presence might actually be saying to them. And then, I think there's so much defensiveness, and there's so much, there's just so much noise. I don't know that our souls can talk to us, and we wonder whether they're Christian or not. They can hear, everybody can hear their soul talking to them. And we want to encourage people to be able to have time and space to be able to reflect, pause, to think deeply about policy, to think deeply about people, to see, to bear witness. But that takes a quieter, more restful, soulful kind of approach. So that's probably just one thing that I'm trying to learn. I know I've always tried to be a pastor to our politicians, and often that just means sending them a request which says, how can I pray for you? I'm praying for you today. Tell me how I can pray for you. And so I've found at times that they'll come and they'll say, can I just sit down and talk to you? And they'll just sit and talk as a person. And I think that that's a really sacred trust that as Christians we can be given, to just listen, whether they're Christian or not Christian, to encourage, to believe in them, whether we agree with all their worldviews or not, to just be in that space where we can just be a loving person to them in a world where they may not experience that very often. And then the outcome is really up to God, isn't it? Like God and people, and I don't know. I had this older gentleman say that politicians are so important because they define the kind of world we live in. I'm not sure that I totally agree with that anymore. I probably would have said, yes, I agree with you, but I look at the world in which Jesus and, say, the Apostle Paul, they had terrible leadership, they had terrible policies, they had terrible political, and yet I look at what they birthed and how it spread, and the lives that were impacted and released and empowered, and the way in which the Christian community just loved people. I don't know. I kind of go, yes, I think they can have influence, but I also think the Christian world can also have a powerful influence, regardless of who's in power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm hoping.
Yes. I think it's I think it's a good hope. I think it's a strong hope. Hope in strong things.
I have to believe that the kingdom of God is bigger than a political party. I have to believe that the kingdom of God is way more powerful, that our politicians may have some impact, but at the end of the day, the kingdom of God has power of itself that is external to to what's happening politically.
Mm.
And the political lobbying is a part of that, but it's only a small part of that kingdom.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think we can make more disciples to be love. I think that could have more impact.
Yes. Yes. And I love that your response to the noise, as you put it, is not to disengage. You're not wanting to contribute yet more noise, but you don't disengage. But it's actually this really active leaning into the kingdom again in that secret place, but being changed and moved and led in how you step in. I think that seems like a really important choice we can make at this time.
Yeah,
as
because we
well.
can't stay silent, but we also can't, I don't think we can do the rah-rah either.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for your time with me today. It's so good to talk to you and hear such wisdom from your experience and all your experience in this area and more that has
Well, I
influenced
think it's
it.
a learning thing, isn't it? We're all growing, and I feel like, I just feel like there's just so much to learn, isn't there? The more you know who Jesus is, the more you realize you really don't know much at all.
There's so many more beautiful things to learn, but we're in it together.
It is, and it just breaks my heart when I see so many people hungry and, experiencing war, and I just kind of go, it must just be breaking God's heart at the moment. And you feel so powerless in that. But I have to believe that every prayer uttered is powerful, every act of love is powerful, and we just have to do it, whether we think it's making a big difference or not. I think we just have to. Sometimes we just have to say it for the kingdom's sake. Sometimes we just have to do it for the kingdom's sake. And sometimes we just have to be for the kingdom's sake. Yeah.
Yeah, for the kingdom's sake.
Totally.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you for the opportunity.